What do you think is the actual most underrated wizard spell? I don't know, I think there's a lot of different ways that you could go with this. In terms of like utility, probably rope trick. For only an action, you're able to climb 60 feet up, enter an invisible portal that can hold up to 8 creatures and stay there for what, an hour? It's a fantastic spell for infiltration missions, for a quick stealth, climbing into a building, or just having a conversation and not needing to worry about scrying. Because since the rope trick creates an extra dimensional space, you can't be targeted with a regular scrying spell while inside of it. Heck, rope trick is even great if you're just trying to take a short rest in a dungeon. I'm surprised this spell isn't talked about more. And if you're looking for a damage spell, I would probably also direct you to the 2nd level spell Rhyme's Binding Ice, which came out in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. For a 2nd level spell slot, you get a 30-foot cone of cold damage, 3d8 cold damage to be exact. But if a creature fails the saving throw, they are locked in place. Their speed is reduced to 0. Binding Ice is one of the best control spells in the game, and I will stand by that opinion. Being able to reduce the speed of a horde of creatures to 0 is incredibly impactful. This spell even works on creatures with immunity to conditions like grappling, so I put it in the very, very high echelons of wizard spells. Honestly, I think it's not talked about a lot just because it's a new spell that came out in a book that was primarily geared for dungeon masters and not towards players. But even then, there are new subclasses and feats in Treasury of Dragons. Honestly, I don't know why Rhyme's Binding Ice isn't a more popular spell. And I guess one final spell, if you don't have access to Treasury of Dragons, is Cloud of Daggers. So hopefully that answers your question. The next question, though, says, Local Wizard Supremacist here, you've said that in D&D, Warlock is your favorite class to run as a Game Master. But do you have a favorite class or archetype lore-wise, and why? I'm going to be honest, I don't pay attention to the class lore at all. It's a tradition that I've held over since my early days of playing D&D, and I think that's because a lot of the times, the class lore has gotten in the way of better gameplay. Famously in the past, Paladins had to be good, and that was annoying, and recently in 5th edition, Druids for some reason can't wear metal armor, so I don't pay a lot of attention to the lore or the class archetypes at all. And part of that is me fundamentally disagreeing with a lot of the design choices in 5th edition. Like, for instance, when I deal with Warlocks, I'm not as concerned about who you made a pact with, more so how you made the pact. Or like, what is the difference between a sorcerer and a wizard? In my eyes, the sorcerer is the damage dealing spellcaster, while the wizard is the more utility caster. But a lot of that lore does not line up with what Wizards of the Coast has put forward. So I run pretty much any TTRPG now based off of what makes the most sense to me as I'm running the game. I don't tend to worry about class lore at all. The next question, though, comes in the form of a short story. I'm running a fairly realistic medieval, historical, fictional themed Crusader game, that's a mouthful, with fantasy elements based loosely around the First Crusade during the early 1100s IRL. In this world, the party group wanted to have a more idealized version of knighthood and things like that, so girls can be knights. Okay, yeah, fair. One of my players wishes for his character to be vegan, comparing the fact that girls can be knights is similar enough to it. I would say so. Before our session 0, we had a talk about that, and he was cool foregoing being vegan, then threw it on all of us suddenly for session 0. I want to let him play what he wants, but it really makes it hard to have a realistic world setting with that kind of food option. Eating is an important mechanic in the game. What are your suggestions? Do I just make it challenging and difficult for him? Give special a concession? This is the 3rd time I'm trying to record the answer to this question, so here we go. Self-admittedly, this campaign world is not completely realistic. It is a fantasy world, and all things considered, this is a tiny request from a player. And to confirm that feeling, I went to some of my friends in academia and who work at museums. After getting multiple opinions, this is what they told me, that it all comes down to a lack of protein. In medieval Europe, most of the protein people got from their diets came from dairy products or from farm animals. But if they got the necessary daily protein, they would be fine. So with this in mind, this is a simple fix for you as a dungeon master. If you want to be completely realistic, you just have more oats and nuts and seeds and appear in the campaign so that player character can get the necessary amount of protein. Or you do the even more simple fix of just putting in a fantasy plant that's around the campaign map that the person can eat and get their necessary daily amount of protein. And here's the difficult thing about answering this question. I don't think this is a problem with the player. I think this is more a problem with you and the expectations for this game. 99% of the time when people sit down to play a TTRPG, it's to have fun. The players come up with their characters and they go into your campaign world. And sure, there are some understandable restrictions that a game master can put on a campaign world. If someone came up to you and asked to have a rifle in this campaign, yeah, understandably, I could see why that would be a no. It breaks the fantasy. But being vegan in a world where magic exists just doesn't feel all that game-breaking to me. Especially because if we're wanting to dive into the other part of the Crusades, into Islamic culture, a lot of Islamic dishes are just naturally vegan. If you've ever had Turkish delight, that's naturally vegan. Again, I apologize if I'm coming off a little bit strong here, but this is one of my biggest pet peeves when I'm entering a new game. Punishing players for what is, at the end of the day, a role-playing character choice seems insane to me. Keeping it 100 with you, if I sat down at your table and I felt targeted because I made a vegan character, I'd probably just leave. So yeah, my advice basically boils down to this. It's only a problem if you make it a problem. If you don't make this a problem, then it's not a problem, and it will likely have zero impact on your campaign. Next question though, do you have any tips for running political intrigue in TTRPGs? My players need to obtain 3 keys in the possession of 4 very powerful nobles, who control the city the players are in. Almost everyone in the city is affiliated with one of the nobles. It is unlikely the players will succeed if they just try to fight them directly. They will have more success playing their strengths and weaknesses against each other, but I'm having trouble keeping up with their machinations. Political intrigue is something we've talked a lot about in this series, so I encourage you going back through the playlist and checking out all the other times that we've talked about it. But in terms of simplifying things for yourself, one of the best pieces of advice I can give is to know exactly what each faction wants. And I'm not talking about something vague like they want to take over the city. No, something actionable like they want to take control of the city by cornering the market on ore coming in and out of Baldur's Gate, let's say. Or the one goal of this faction now, the thing they want more than anything else, is to destroy this other noble house. Because once that noble house is gone, their magic item trade is going to be booming. Then, once you actually have what the factions want mapped out, then you have one faction move. I like to think of this as the political intrigue dance. One faction is making the move, making the play for power, and all the other factions are trying to adapt. If you just have one faction make their play at a time, it becomes a lot easier for not only yourself, but your players to follow what's going on. One of the things that can kill a political intrigue campaign is when your players, and most importantly you, don't actually know what's going on anymore. Everyone's confused, no one has any actionable goals, and it just becomes a pain. So just having one faction run their scheme at a time is a lot easier. And then, if you still can't keep up, you can hit the nuclear option. You can get rid of one of the factions. Perhaps one of your nobles is taken out by another noble faction. Well, hey, now you've certainly simplified things, and the players can feel like the world is alive and moving, especially if they had nothing to do with the destruction of that noble family. In fact, this is a great move for setting up an antagonist within the political intrigue campaign. Once the players know who orchestrated the fall of the other faction, that can be a fantastic way to introduce a new antagonist. They already have some credibility with the players because they took down that other noble faction. They are obviously dangerous. But to kind of summarize everything, make sure that all of your factions, in this case these 4 powerful nobles, have clear goals and how they're going to accomplish them. Then, like a choreographed fight almost, each noble takes turns acting and the others reacting. This allows your players to eventually join the dance. Sometimes they're the actor, sometimes they're reacting, but it all feels natural and flowing. And if you can't keep track of everything, just keep on killing factions until it becomes manageable. It's always worked for me. Next up though, besides pizza, showing up on time, and knowing my PC inside and out, what are the ways I can make my DM's life and the game better as a player? Ah, you're the type of player I like. There are so many different things you can do, but I'm going to give you 3. The first thing you can start doing is to start spotlighting other player characters. Give them an alley-oop in combat, or if your group loves role-playing, sit down and ask the player about their character. Help the DM spread the spotlight around the table. This takes a huge weight off of your DM's shoulders. Secondly, talk to your DM about some long-term goals you have for your character. They can be backstory goals, or even a goal as simple as, man, I'd really like a bag of holding at some point. Let them know that these are goals that both you and your character are prioritizing. That way your DM can easier bait a plot hook to have you go after it. And it's just better for you in the long run because you're actually getting, ideally, what you're asking for. And finally, be honest with your Dungeon Master about how the session went. Now here's the thing with most Dungeon Masters, they want to get better, they want to improve their DMing, but constructive criticism hurts a lot. So as a player, we're in a difficult spot. However, if you can summon the courage to call out a moment every now and then that you didn't like after the session, usually in private with your Dungeon Master, sometimes those are the best things you can do. It can be something as simple as, hey, we've had a lot of the paralysis condition in combats lately. It makes combats kind of boring for me when I'm constantly being paralyzed all the time. Can we tone that down a bit? Or even something like, hey, this shopkeeper annoys the hell out of me. Can we see him a little bit less? Like, I'm actually over them at a game. I don't ever need to see them again. And if this feels a little bit too intimidating or something that you don't feel comfortable with doing, then you can try doing the exact opposite of it. Really highlight to your Dungeon Master the things that you loved about their session. What things you want them to do more of. If you loved how your Dungeon Master used more small enemies in combat, let them know. If you want to see more of that shopkeeper because they're your favorite NPC now, let your Dungeon Master know. And ideally, this will lead your Dungeon Master more naturally towards things that you like and away from things that you don't like. However, a secret fourth tip I have for you for learning the ways to make your DM's life easier is to DM a game yourself. Think of it as a learning opportunity and think to yourself, man, I wish my players had done this, or would have been so much easier on me if a player did this. And then you can just be the change you want to see in the world. But now it's time to answer some questions from the Patreon, and the first one is from Seb. My year-plus campaign with a narrative focus has had scheduling issues and has almost become a West March-like, with adulthood getting in the way, kids, work, holidays, etc., of everyone joining each week. Theoretical max of 7 players, but 3 to 5 is typical. I've had to limit sessions to 5 players if there are too many people. My question is how to preserve the narrative elements in the campaign if people frequently miss sessions. This is certainly a difficult question, but I'm going to try to answer it the best I can. The first thing I would recommend is having group notes or a session recap that other players can access. That way if they missed a session, they can just read the recap. And maybe you could have it where the person that writes the recap gets a special bonus for that next session. Otherwise, you can take a page out of Network Television's playbook and make your campaigns more episodic. Each time your players attend a session, you're basically telling a self-contained story. This means the quest doesn't take more than a session to complete and everyone there can have a complete experience. However, each one of these quests is probably leading towards a larger story. So if your narrative campaign is focused on leading a rebellion, then one session might be getting a local business owner on your side. And the next session, the players who are there are trying to blow up a bridge or trying to infiltrate the noble's manor. Then, if you choose to go down this particular path, a lot of that storytelling comes from NPC interaction. Each player character will have their own dynamics with certain NPCs. And so then for each one of your 7 player characters, they might have an NPC or 2 with them that helps to filter the story. And what I mean by filter the story is that the player is getting a lot of that narrative growth from this NPC. The NPC is reflecting how the world changes, how the player character changes, and how they as the NPC are changing. The reason why we're using a specific NPC to filter this is that it's a way to only progress one part of the campaign when that player's there. So if that player misses a session, that NPC doesn't have as great a role or maybe is not met, and therefore you can halt that particular development. It's almost a way of preserving campaign growth until that player returns to the fold. However, all of these fixes can only do so much. The best way to resolve scheduling problems is to have a specific time and date each week that you play. No matter what, your players know that this is a specific time that the game is being run each week. That helps grown-ass adults with kids and lives plan around this event. I have a big campaign where I play with lawyers and doctors about twice a month. The reason why these busy people are able to join the campaign is they know exactly which days it's going to be. It doesn't change, and that way they can build their schedules around that. Honestly, a lot of the time, scheduling issues come down to consistency. If you're consistent when you run your sessions, a lot of these issues tend to be resolved over time. Next question though from Jackson, what do you think about having one of the players as the BBEG antagonist? Specifically, the players start with amnesia and discover who they are throughout the campaign. I'm actually doing this in the current campaign, as some of you know. So I'm not going to say that this is a bad idea by any means, but I am going to give you a few words of caution. Firstly, don't make the player antagonist central to your campaign. If the player has to be the antagonist, you're probably doing something wrong. Secondly, check out of game if this is something that the player would want. Now, you don't need to explicitly say you're the antagonist of the campaign, but tell the player that you're wishing to do some stuff with their backstory behind the scenes, and if there's anything that they want you not to touch or to preserve. Coming to terms with why a player wants to play their character is important. And finally, at the moment of truth, where usually the player has to decide whether to embrace being the antagonist or go back to being a hero, you should probably give them an actual choice. Player agency is important in all TTRPGs, so railroading a player down the path of being a villain is kind of a dick move. But if you have all of those bases covered, and you have a player that you trust, and I mean really trust, then I think that this is a great way to make a memorable character in your campaign. But again, you have to trust the player and the player has to trust you. This entire concept is built around that trust. So hopefully that answers your question, and if you out there want your questions answered, more influence on what gets made on this channel, or even one-on-one DM coaching, consider going over and checking out my Patreon. Enough plugging the Patreon though. Next question. What are your thoughts on the concept of having rotating DMs for a group? It's not really talked about in general. I think this would work great for episodic TTRPGs or campaigns where each DM has 3 to 5 sessions per chapter. This way each DM can tell their stories without interfering with the other DM's plans. This would also help with DM burnout and forever DM syndromes. I can also help create more improv forward and unique stories with 2+ people's perspectives. Of course, it has its downsides compared to just having one DM for the campaign, but what are your thoughts on this? Would you give this a try with another experienced DM that you trust and love to hang out with? Imagine every player at the table having a consistent but quick go at DMing. Crazy to imagine. So I think for some groups having this rotating cast of DMs is great, and that's for all the reasons that you listed. I would personally never want to be, though, in a rotating cast of DMs. At least in the way you described. West March's campaign is a little different, because there are failsafes in place for the campaign world, and generally is standard amongst all the DMs, and there are just so many players that it makes sense to have multiple DMs. But here's the thing for me as a DM, I operate off of the rhythm of a campaign. I like to get into a flow, and if I'm stopping every few sessions to allow other DMs to take over, I start to lose that momentum with what I'm doing. I don't start feeling really good as a DM with a campaign until I'm 5 to 10 sessions in, where I feel like I know where the player characters are, everyone is feeling the rhythm and the flow of a campaign, and we're all just cruising through. I quite frankly don't want to have to set down the DM responsibilities and wait for who knows how long until it's my turn again. You see, for me, I'm never burned out in a campaign by just running sessions for a long time. That's not how it happens. If I ever get a little burned out, it's because I don't know where the campaign is going, or I'm just not interested in the player characters with that particular campaign, and I have really no interest in seeing where they're going. And usually the way I fix that is I just need to play more. I need to find the parts of the campaign that I am actually interested in. Then I have to think about the impact on all my DMing friends, because I have so many friends that I think are amazing DMs. And if I'm sitting there running a game and they're waiting on me, I'm thinking in the back of my head, well, not only am I going to have to put down the DMing mantle in 1 or 2 sessions and then wait for, let's call it 2 months before I can continue telling the story I want to tell, but I'm also waiting to play their campaign that I want to play right now. I've also seen sometimes with a rotating cast of DMs how there are obvious favorite DMs, and when one of the less favorable DMs comes into the fold, some of the players just walk away and they wait for the quote-unquote good DM to return. It can be a huge problem if your group isn't right for DMs that cycle through. So it's not right for me or any of my groups, but it might be right for you and your group. Last question for today though, what would be your advice for a low magic setting campaign? What role would magic play in the campaign? What classes would you allow or not allow? How would you make enemies and combats exciting? Do you think the stories in a low magic setting can be as high stakes and compelling as a normal fantasy setting? God damn it, I said one last question. Alright, let's go through these one by one. What would be your advice for a low magic setting? I think first and foremost, you have to define what low magic means to you. Is low magic there just not being a lot of magic? Is low magic meaning that people don't use magic, but there are magical creatures out there? Like a benchmark that I use for someone is, do you think that Game of Thrones is low magic? Because that question will tell you a lot. Some people will argue, no, there are dragons flying around. Others will say, since people aren't casting spells regularly, that yeah, it's low magic. So really hone in on what that magic means to you. I think if you're running D&D 5th edition, the best way to come at the problem is to say, there's not a lot of magic in the world, but the players are magical. This helps to reinforce that they are the main characters, and it also just makes it a lot easier to run this system because D&D 5th edition assumes that everyone in the party is magical. Trying to do a low magic campaign is nearly impossible unless you ban lots of classes and subclasses. You're never going to be able to tell me that a Storm Herald Barbarian isn't magic, or that barbarians in general don't have some magical qualities to them. If you're looking for inspiration as to how magic would work in a campaign like this, I recommend going back to classic books and series like the Black Company series or Joe Abercrombie's First Law trilogy. And even more popular titles like Game of Thrones can help influence what magic's role is in the world. For me, I think the joy of a low magic campaign is bringing wonder back to magic. Magic is not this innate thing that's out there, and so when you see magic, it's wild and weird and mysterious. Now, if you're talking about classes to allow or to not allow, I just allow all the classes. I mean, again, I think that you're probably talking about D&D here, and if you're sitting down to play D&D 5e, you're expecting to be able to play all the classes. I mean, all the players are going to be playing something innately magical if you're playing 5th edition. I think the way to manage magical classes in a low magic setting, though, is to do it through narrative and role-playing purposes. Like, I had a player play a wizard in a low magic setting where basically all the magic was gone from the world. I didn't adjust the class at all. The wizard just knew that they were one of the few people in the world that could do magic. Practically nobody had seen a spell before or even believed that magic existed. So they weren't walking around and finding spell scrolls, and if they were using magic in public, people thought they were a demon or something. And for us, that felt good. I got to have my low magic campaign setting where there wasn't a lot of magic everywhere, and the player did absolutely feel that, but still they got to play a wizard that they had been wanting to play for years. Let's see, then you also ask how you would make enemies and combats exciting. Well, it really doesn't change how I make combats exciting from high magic to low magic. I make the combats challenging, I give the enemies unique abilities that test the players. I make sure my map creation and terrain is on point. You know what the difference between a highly skilled assassin and a beholder is mechanically in combat? Nothing. I literally just reflavored the I-beams to be knives coated with different types of poisons. That anti-magic cone that comes out of the beholder's eyes, that just came from an ancient magical artifact that powerful assassin just happened to pick up. Practically every monster in the monster manual can be reflavored to make it so that they are non-magical. So for that reason, I think that you can absolutely have stories in low magic settings that are as compelling as a normal fantasy campaign. I mean, not every compelling movie is a Marvel superhero movie. A political intrigue plot, a noir mystery, or an epic odyssey by old war heroes to return home from a distant land are all possibilities for a great high-stakes low magic setting. Because here's the thing with stakes. The stakes of the campaign are not the magnitude of the threat. Like, sure, you can have in high magic campaigns the great space laser that when it shoots up into the sky, it's gonna destroy the entire material plane. But that can be a very low stakes campaigns for players if they are not invested in the story. A campaign about saving a princess that had been kidnapped by a rival kingdom can have even higher stakes if the players love that princess NPC. So hopefully that's enough to go on to begin crafting your own low magic campaign. And if you want to hear me answer some more questions, check out this video right here. Also, thank you for entering the dungeon.